This Family Life News podcast is made possible by the support of listeners like you.
When we're lonely, we not only feel terrible, but our general health also suffers. It's such a concern that in 2023, the former U.S. Surgeon General compared the health impact of loneliness to the physical impact of smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day. We'll be talking about loneliness today here on Family Life's Inside Out. I'm Martha Manikas Foster, and my guest is licensed family therapist Glenn Lutchins, who's been part of the counseling team for Colorado-based Focus on the Family for almost 30 years. Welcome back, Glenn, to Inside Out.
Martha, great to be with you. Thank you.
Well, last time we talked, we were talking about managing holiday conflict back in 2023. Also something that is always pertinent. But right now, let's talk about loneliness. Most of us know that it feels emotionally awful. And physically, we're learning that it's connected with greater risk of heart disease, dementia, stroke, depression, anxiety, and even premature death. But
right.
Not all people who feel lonely are physically isolated. I think that when you say lonely, one of the pictures many of us can put in our minds is during the lockdown of COVID, people who were in nursing homes, they weren't able to see anybody. But that's not always the picture. So could you please kind of paint that picture for us of some of the life situations where people find that they feel lonely?
Yeah, in many ways, loneliness is more a state of heart, a state of mind. I use state of heart because it's kind of what's going on inside me.
Uh-huh.
And a lot of that has to do with how I feel about myself. Like you're saying, Martha, we do tend to view it as an absence of connection, and that certainly is there. But it can factor in deeper and fuller ways depending upon the type of loneliness that people may be encountering in their lives.
So type of loneliness?
Yeah, there are different types of loneliness, I think. I mean, one would be that isolation loneliness that you mentioned, where in its most severe cases, you're talking about somebody, stranded on a desert island,
right,
or a prisoner of war, or to some degree, obviously to the same degree, but the COVID experience. So that would be what I would refer to as isolation loneliness. There's also situational loneliness. And situational loneliness really speaks to the fact that there has been connection before, but now for some reason there's something that's come into play where that connection with a person or a group of people has changed. Maybe it's where someone has moved away. Maybe there's been a death or a divorce.
Right.
Maybe it's where our kids have moved away.
Right.
And so there's kind of this change now from the way it was. And so situational loneliness.
So I can relate to that. In my undergrad, I was 2 years in a close relationship, close friendships at a small Christian liberal arts school. And then I transferred to a large state university very far away. And I went from people who were my prayer partners and my prank partners to being what I felt like alone in the middle of one dorm was the size of my whole campus from before. So yes, I can understand that one. But there's more.
Yeah. Developmental loneliness, this really develops in a person who maybe has never had that capacity or has developed the capacity. I think the capacity is there, but has never developed that ability to connect well with other people. Maybe it's because a person has experienced rejection, bullying, abuse in their life to some degree or other. And a person, they want connection, but they don't necessarily feel like they deserve connection. You get almost the opposite also in that developmental loneliness when a person, they don't have a problem with starting a conversation. The problem is they don't know how to end a conversation. And so they end up kind of glomming on. It's not a very technical term, but I think we all know what it means. When somebody gloms on, it's almost like their worth, their identity has to be in front of the mirror, and another person is that mirror. So as long as they're communicating with someone, they have it. What happens, though, unfortunately, is that with time, that other person will probably get to the point where they're like, I can't handle this. Maybe they started out by trying to be a good, kind, loving Christian, but at some point it's very tempting to just say, okay, this is too much, and then they just end the relationship. Now what happens to the person? It's true. I'm not lovable.
It's reinforcing it. Yes, right.
Yeah, it just reinforces that. So that's kind of the developmental loneliness that can occur. And then you get kind of a cultural loneliness, which is fostered by the attitudes of our culture, some of the technology of our culture,
sure.
where we have, cell phones that can connect us theoretically to people, but they leave it about, a quarter of an inch deep and
yes.
a mile wide.
Right.
So there's not much sense of really connecting. Even the architecture that we have in homes, a lot of times that front porch is not there.
Oh, yes. Right.
And we also have the remote control for the garage door opener. I can pull in and I don't have to see anyone. Whereas years ago, there were people that I would connect with at some level, talk about the day, but now it's real easy to isolate. So that cultural loneliness can occur. And the last one would be existential loneliness. This is the one that I relate to the most. In my early 20s, I went through a period of time where I had trusted in Christ at an early age, but I went through about a year's period of time of just really struggling with my faith. And so desiring to be connected to the ultimate purpose giver, the ultimate reality, God himself, I just grappled with and struggled with. And so there are times, in fact, I remember a conversation with my brother. He and I were working at a woodworking shop, and I was just having a really tough day. I had gone into the bathroom. I just broke out in tears. And by the time we finished the day, I pulled it together to go back to work, but finished the day, went into the car. I just couldn't hold it together anymore, and I just busted out in tears. And my brother said to me, he said, "Glenn, what's the matter?" I said, "Gary, more than anything in the world, I want to believe, but I just can't believe." And he said something that I will never forget.
Oh, and I want to hear it.
He said, "Glenn, I don't think of you as any less of a person or a Christian just because you're going through this." Now, he and I talked about reasons for the faith after that. I don't remember a word of that. But I remember those words, which were accepting, which were loving, which were affirming. And again, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of times loneliness is a state of heart. I can be around thousands of people and feel as lonely as a person stranded on a desert island. But if I'm not feeling that level of connection and acceptance, wanting to be heard and understood, I can experience a great level of loneliness.
If we're feeling lonely and we look up Christian articles and we talk to some of our Christian friends, frequently they want to reassure us by saying, even though you're in the middle of something hard, depression, loneliness, infertility, I mean, you name it, they want to say, God is going to use this pain to help you grow to be more like him. And I think that most of us don't really want to hear it at that moment. It's hard to hear at that moment. But I bet you can assure us that God can use that loneliness, right?
Yeah, it's true that he does. At that moment, we're wanting connection. And we don't have to feel guilty that we want connection. I mean, when you think about it, God is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. He's triune. And so God, in his very essence, is connection.
Right.
So the fact that I want connection is a part of what it just simply means to be a human being. But it is really important to say to ourselves, okay, that first connection, that first relationship with God where I can always come to him, I can always share my heart, I can be honest, I can read his word. I can have that connection, but I also need other people to fill that gap as well.
Right. Let me just take a moment to reset for those who are listening to us. If you're just joining us, you're listening to Inside Out on Family Life. I'm talking today with licensed family therapist Glenn Lutchens, a veteran member of the Focus on the Family counseling team. So Glenn, what kind of hope can you offer lonely people listening? What practical steps might you suggest that might help people begin to feel less lonely? You're talking about connection. You're talking about relationship. Is that part of the answer?
I think it is. I think a part of it, maybe even a prior component, is to realize that our best friend talks to us all the time. Now, I'm not just talking about God. I mean, God ultimately, I believe, is our best friend. But who talks to us maybe more than any other human being?
Ourselves?
And it's ourselves, right? In Scripture, there are a number of places, the Psalms, where the psalmist would talk about, my heart is saying within me. And so recognizing I can become more comfortable with who I am. Maybe I'm dealing with some inadequacy. Maybe I'm dealing with rejection. Maybe I'm dealing with guilt. I can confess to the Lord. David said, when your hand was heavy upon me, it was because I I really held this in. I wasn't honest with you. So we can develop a healthy understanding of who we are, not in a narcissistic, self-aggrandizing way, but just realizing if God can love me as I am, I can love myself as I am too. And then also realizing that I can reach out to other people. I can take initiative. Now, the problem with taking initiative is what? I can be rejected.
Rejection, right. And especially if I see myself reflected in how much attention somebody gives me, that would be terrible. Yeah. It would really hurt.
Yeah, absolutely. So looking at it from the vantage point of, okay, I can take some steps toward another person. I don't have to share with them my whole life story. I can share something. I can grow in my level of trust to that person, and that person is doing the same. They can develop in their level of trust with us. But just seeing the opportunity that I have something valuable for another person to be aware of, to know who I am. And so taking those steps. I think it's also really important to recognize that it's easy to get so self-focused as far as, okay, what is my need for connection, that I lose awareness of other people's need for connection too. Can I reach out to someone who maybe doesn't feel like they're connecting with people, and can I be Jesus to him or her?
So this is somewhat filling out the picture that we see or we hear so many times, that when you are especially lonely is one of the things, or especially blue or isolated, that by actually ministering to someone else, actually reaching out, maybe it's not even what you would call ministry, but reaching out is one of the ways that it's intended to help someone else, but there's a symbiotic relationship that develops and it helps you as well. Is that along the same lines?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. I mean, you're reaching out in part because you sense out loneliness in you, but you're looking at another person's need. I love Philippians 2, verse 4, but Philippians 2:4, where it says, look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. So I can recognize my need for connection, but I also can see that other people have that. And if I'm able to reach out to them, my need is going to be met as well.
And you're talking right there about a description of Christ, right, in Philippians 2. Yeah. And so very much about how we can be probably frequently unseen, that the Spirit of God is working in us for that, but we can be being transformed into the likeness of Christ, even as we are reaching out to someone who might be lonely and who may, in fact, help us in our own loneliness. Yeah.
I think with the loneliness that a lot of times other people encounter, if I can look at the opportunity of just reflecting back what I'm hearing from them, a lot of times we go into the corrective mode.
Right.
Well, they're not thinking about it straight. And maybe they're not. But if I can first just let them know I hear them.
Yes.
And I respect the emotion that they have, not necessarily saying it's right, but respecting the emotion that they feel at those times where we might say something that is maybe challenging to another person. They have first known that we hear and understand them. If we don't do that, it's like trying to jump from the ground floor up to the second floor without a stairway.
That's a great image. Yeah. I think the most attractive thing to me about active listening is very much that first step with the listening and letting the person know that you literally hear them and that you're storing that away as part of the understanding of the other person. So in small practical steps, would this be like volunteer for the soup kitchen so you can be helping somebody else, and in the process you meet other people and you may be having some of these conversations? Is it like looking out for a neighbor who might be lonely? For somebody who's almost like stymied in their loneliness, what could they physically do?
Well, I think those are two great examples. I mean, just looking for avenues of reaching out. A lot of times I hear people say, I don't like big churches because you don't feel connected. And big churches and small churches, I mean, I think they all have things to offer. But a lot of times in a big church, the way to connect is look at, okay, what's an avenue of ministry? Because if you're going and you're sitting in a pew or a chair and then you leave, you're probably going to feel pretty lonely in that scenario. But when you're arm in arm in ministry together, there's a lot of connection that takes place in that situation. And just having an open eyes to see, are there some people here along the way that the Lord would give me opportunity to reach out to with kindness and love?
So Glenn, I think my final question will be, okay, lonely people have friends that maybe they don't feel so connected to, or people who want to be their friends. How can a lonely person's friends make a difference for the lonely person?
Well, some of this will be a challenge to the individual who is lonely, because again, if it's a developmental loneliness, they may need to do some work as far as understanding what those deeper hurts and pains in their life are that have maybe limited them in their understanding of this other person. But I think with another person reaching out to them, especially if they're reaching out with kindness, if they're validating the emotions, and again, I think it's important for people not to get overwhelmed. So if there's someone who really just says, hey, I'd love to, maybe every week we can do something, you may need to set some boundaries, because that's probably going to overwhelm you over a short period of time, after a short period of time. So if it's a scenario where there's enough gap between, and yet that person can still be an important part of our life, we need to be able to say no as much as we need to be able to say yes.
Sure. I guess I was thinking that just because someone's lonely, that doesn't mean there isn't anybody out there who would like to be closer. And sometimes I think lonely people who are surrounded, we're talking about, you don't have to be on an island, right? You could be in the middle of a lot of people and lonely. It's possible that your friends don't know that's what you're feeling.
Yeah. And just being able to share what are you encountering. I mean, I think sometimes that depends too on just what the phraseology is, when a person approaches another individual. We often will say, so how are you doing? Well, if I say it that way, with that tone, it's probably more of a formality.
Yes.
If I say, Martha, how are things going for you? How has it been lately for you? That sounds like I'm more interested.
It does.
That sounds like I care about what's going on in your life. And I think it encourages a person to share what's going on.
Right. And I'm imagining from the times when I've been lonely in my life, I would probably feast on the fact that somebody was asking. So, yes. Yeah. Well, thank you, Glenn. Thanks for having thought through this and worked through this with others, and for joining us here to talk about it on Family Life's Inside Out.
It's been great to be with you, Martha. Thank you.
My guest has been licensed family therapist Glenn Lutchins, a 29-year veteran of the Focus on the Family counseling team. To connect with Focus on the Family's counseling team, call 1-855-771-HELP. So that's 1-855-771-4357. That's on weekdays from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. Mountain Time. I'm Martha Manikas Foster with Inside Out on Family Life.
Thank you for listening to this Family Life News podcast. If you've been encouraged by what you've heard, please share it with others and click the subscribe button to automatically receive future episodes. Family Life is a listener-supported ministry. Podcasts like this are made possible by your financial partnership. Find out more at familylife.org.